Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will get started here in about 2 minutes to just allow everybody time to log on, make sure that you have your coffee and you're ready to rock this thing today. You're going to get some great information.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to welcome you all to our high performing entities information session and really excited to launch this work this year. My name is Christy Sadri. I am the Division Director for Charter School Authorizing and really excited to get to spend some time with you all this morning as we launch this work together. And I am here with my amazing team, Brittany, Sarah, and John, who are going to be leading you through this process. And just a great big thank you to them and to you all for being here on this Friday morning. And Brittany, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christy. My name is Brittany Glenn. I am the new schools manager. Prior to this job, I was on the portfolio team. And so that's kind of the back end of once you become a charter. And then before that, I spent most of my career being in a campus leadership position at a charter school. So charter is kind of in my blood. So I'm happy to be here, happy to give you this information. I am joined by the most fabulous team out there, and I will let them introduce themselves.
I'll go ahead and start. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Garland. I've been with the agency doing charter school applications and support since 2015, I believe. That's a long time now that I say it out loud and put words to it. Nonetheless, I'm excited to share some information with you all. I see some familiar names on the attendee list, so welcome and good morning. And I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Also happy to have y'all here. My name is Sarah Khan, and I have been working as a new school specialist for almost a year now. Prior to that, I worked in the charter school realm, working my way all the way from a teacher all the way up to the district office. So I have seen a lot and hope that I can be a wealth of knowledge for you all as I support you on this journey. Super excited to have you.
Awesome. Sorry about that. Couldn't get off of mute for a second. But I am very happy to have you. We're going to talk about a lot of great things. Just to preface, this meeting is for our high performing entities, which is separate from our typical Gen 30 sub D. So if you're not in the right place, I would hate for you to watch the whole presentation and they're like, oh, this isn't for me. But I will reiterate that again as we kind of go through these presentations, but just to kind of preface that. If you have questions, we're going to use that question and answer feature. That way we can either get to your question and or save it to add it to our FAQ and then respond there. My team is super diligent about looking at those questions and typing out answers, giving answers live. So we definitely have some time built out this morning for us to do that. So let's just get started. So we are going to go over just to ground all of our thinking before we talk about all of the wonderful things that come with the high performing entities application, the charter portfolio overview. It's important to kind of know where we came from and kind of see where we're going. So you have met our wonderful team. We work really hard because our job is to serve you and to ultimately serve the students of Texas. And we really want the best learning environments for them. So that really grounds our knowledge in all the things that we do here today. So the agenda for today, we want to make sure that you know who we are. That way, if you have questions, you know who to ask. Make sure you send all your questions to Christy. No, I'm just kidding, but we will share our contact information at the end. And that way, if you have questions, you can send it appropriately. We'll spend some time this morning just for the next 15, 20 minutes or so going over the charter portfolio and just talking about that background knowledge. Then my team and I will kind of break down the application overview for you, where you can see the timelines and what each step of the application entails, how to submit it, all of those things we'll talk about in the application overview section. We'll have some time spent to do some questions. We'll take a little cell phone break in case you need to get up and refill your coffee. I will definitely be doing that. And then we'll have a couple people join us today to give you some background knowledge on some larger pieces of the pie. We'll have Dina and Pija join to do a financial plan workbook breakdown. John will kind of start that conversation just to anchor your knowledge before they kind of get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of what is needed. We'll have some time to do some questions after that because there's typically some more questions after you see that piece of the pie. And then we'll have Nate join us to go over the charter school program grant, which is a really great opportunity. Typically, it is embedded in our application, but for the high performing entities, it is a separate attachment. So he will kind of walk you through that and give you some background knowledge on that. And then we'll wrap up and see if there's any lingering questions before we move forward. And then hopefully by the time you leave here, you feel super, super ready for what is to come. So let's talk a little bit about open enrollment charters in Texas. So just to give you a little bit of legislative history, this kind of all started back in 1995. I won't age myself and tell you how old I was then, but this has slowly progressed. And the big note here for you is that in 1996, the State Board of Education awards the first open enrollment charter. And it kind of moving through the years, that power has kind of shifted now to the Commissioner of Education. So that's one of the bigger things that I wanted to point out there. If you really like dates and really like charts, you're more than welcome to come back to this slide and dig a little deeper. So some foundational definitions that we feel is important for you to know, there's two. Here at TEA, we love our acronyms. So it is important for you to, if you hear an acronym and you don't know what the acronym stands for, we really try our best to kind of tell you the acronym and then tell you what it means. So the first one is open enrollment. And what is open enrollment? Because you're going to hear that quite a bit. So it is a school that is open to all students on a first come, first served basis, regardless of the school model. It may consider whether a student has a documented history of criminal offenses, and a school that specializes in performing arts may also consider if the student has those artistic abilities in order to be served at that campus. So that is open enrollment, which all charters are. Our next definition is LEA. So Texas authorizes local education agencies, and we use that short acronym LEA. Charter schools are their own LEA, which means they have their own governing board. They're legally responsible for administration, performance, and governance. And so any entity may not hold multiple charter LEAs. So when you are doing your application, you'll be applying for one. The bigger purposes that we always want to anchor our knowledge to is the purpose of the charter schools here in Texas. We want to improve student learning. We want to increase choice opportunities in the public school system, create the professional opportunities to attract those new teachers, establish a new form of accountability, and encourage different and innovative learning methods. That's our goals. We really want to always keep those in mind as we continue to move forward. And for you as applicants, these are the things that we want to see very prevalent in your application and how you're meeting those things. So a little bit of breakdown knowledge of just kind of where we are with our schools. So currently we have 183 LEAs, which in turn is about 916 campuses, which results in quite a bit of students. So there's a large number of kids in Texas being served by charter school campuses. So kind of breaking that data down even more so you can see. So currently we have 14 large operators, which means they have 10 or more campuses. And that is about 471 campuses total in that large operator section. We have 21 medium operators, which is between 6 and 9 campuses, resulting in about 145 campuses total in that area. We have 78 small operators, which is 2 to 5 campuses, 227 campuses, and 73 standalone operators, which is about 73 campuses. So the majority of our charter schools kind of fall into that small operator category, managing fewer than 6 campuses. So a little bit of student demographics. You can see all of the breakdowns at the top, but charter schools enroll 2% more Black and 5% more Hispanic students than the traditional schools. So it's interesting when you look at those demographics and kind of see where the students are being served. As we take a look at the staffing demographics, you can see that charter schools employ a higher percentage of non-white teachers than traditional districts. And again, if you want to see more of the information, it's kind of listed out there at the top for you. So our application approval history, so since 2013, 13.4 of charter applicants have been approved. So that's 338 charter applications, resulting in 47 approved charters. It's really awesome to just kind of see how many applications we're getting in, how many turn into approved charters. And then when we go to these visits, we're seeing, that paper idea really come to fruition. So our information is listed on the screen for myself, Sarah, and John. That top email address goes to all 3 of us. So if you want to get us all at the same time, you can always send it there. But we want to make sure you have this. We'll pop this up periodically, especially towards the end in case you are unable to capture it right now. We just want to make sure that you have clear communication with us if needed. And we will talk through what that communication line can be now that the application is open. All right, so we're going to take a second and switch gears. Do we have any questions in our Q&A team? Perfect. All right, so we are going to talk through the application overview. Give John a second to pop up our next slide.
Sorry, you all. 1 second. It's Friday and my computer knows it. 1 second.
That's all right. I can sing for us if we want. No, you guys don't want to hear that. Alrighty. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, John's computer, for allowing him to share this screen. All right. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we will discuss both our application process as well as the application itself. So again, we're going to use the feature of the question and answer if you have specific questions, and we'll get to them during our scheduled time. So a little background information before we keep driving forward. So the high performing entities applicant must currently hold a subchapter E or C, or be an out-of-state charter school organization that is considered a high performing by various different metrics. The high performing entities application requires applicants to provide a more comprehensive dive into their performance and student data in addition to answering narrative questions. The applicant must demonstrate clear evidence of their high performing entity status, and that there are two different timelines, which we will jump into the next slides. So I'm kind of hitting the highlights for you. So again, if this is not the presentation for you, I save you your time. Our application was launched on September 10th, and all of the materials can be found on our charter applicants page on the TEA page. So the bigger question is, why was this application created and kind of where you fall in this? So this application was designed to allow well-qualified candidates to replicate and or open new charter schools in Texas, ensuring access to high-quality charter schools that launch as A or B rated schools. So with that said, we just want to make sure you're here for the correct application info session. And if you need to learn more about our Generation 30 Sub D or Sub E process, our next and final session will be on September 26th at 9 a.m. All right, guys, well, let's get started. So there are two timelines that I mentioned before. The first one will be based on getting approved in the January SBOE deliberation session. So we've launched the application, so we're past that now. We are now to our information session. Thank you for being here so you can learn a little bit more. We'll offer those additional supports this month. And then the application submission is October 11th for the January approval. It is by 5 p.m. We'll break that down even more in a minute, but I just want to make sure you know that that application is due on the 11th of October. Then we're going to move into the data analysis review, which happens in December which happens in October through November. And then our due diligence period will then run from November. We'll move into COE proposals towards the end of November, and then moving to the SBOE deliberation in January of 2025. So our next timeline is April approval. So whenever you're looking at this, you have to decide like how fast you would like to kind of move through this process, and you can pick which timeline kind of fits you better. So April approval is very similar from the launch all the way to the additional supports. This deadline is December 2nd at 5 p.m. The data analysis and eligibility will be December through January. Then we move into the due diligence period in January, COE proposal in February, and then ultimately going to the SBOE deliberation in April of 2025. Here are the two timelines side by side. It helps to see the breakdown depending on which SBOE approval timeframe you best fit in. So the way my brain operates, I like to see how things match up. So we figured we would give you a very clean snippet on the screen. And you will have access to all of these decks. So no fret if you don't get it right now, to a screenshot of something right now. All right, so we've talked about a lot of things already within just a couple of slides, but let's talk about it from 10,000 feet for a second to discuss some big picture questions that we hope to address for you, starting with the most basic question, are we even eligible to apply? What is this application? Even discussing what happens after you have submitted your application. Our hope is that you walk away with a good understanding of where you fall in this process, the necessary commitments required for our process, and the expectations that determine how far you might advance in this process. So let's get started with a discussion about who can apply for this. So there are two different applications. The first one is for local operators. So the entity is currently operating a charter program under TUC, Chapter 12, Subchapter C or E. The entity must have performed at an overall level in the highest or second highest performance rating category under TUC Chapter 39, subsection C. So that is the first one in the blue. That is for our local operator. So moving on to our yellow one, our out of state. This one is for out of state operators. So the entity is affiliated with a charter operation that operates one or more charter schools in another state. The affiliated charter operator must have performed at an overall level that is comparable to that highest or second highest performance rating under the TUC Chapter 39, subsection C, or the entity must propose to operate the charter school program that is currently implemented in the affiliate charter operator existing school. So there is more details about the eligibility listing and our instruction and guidance for these two applications. But it depends on if you're in state or out of state, which one you'll fill in and complete and run that process for that particular application. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to take you through accessing the documents.
And before I jump into that, there was a question in the chat once you reviewed those timelines and noted the different activities that are going to take place. One question was asking, so there's no external review of these applications. So in our historical subchapter D, subchapter E, we do have those external reviews. However, later on in this presentation, we're going to walk you through what's going to be happening in lieu of those. So in short, no, there's no external reviews for this application. However, there are other activities that we'll be doing to determine eligibility. Beautiful. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about accessing the application documents. We have many resources located on our charter applicant page. So we want to make sure that you're selecting the correct application. So on the next slide, I'm going to play a video just to show you where you can access these documents, and then we'll talk through it a little bit more.
I'm going to walk you through exactly how you can open up your
Apologies, you all. Again, more technical. There we go. All right, let's try it again.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through exactly how you can open up your high-performing entity, local or state, out-of-state application. So what you'll notice is here on the charter applicants webpage, we have multiple resources. So the documents you need to look for are going to be the high-performing entity local and the high-performing entity out-of-state. These are going to give you the high-performing application. So if you can ignore this application documents, that's just going to be for our normal sub-D operator. You're going to want to look for the high-performing entity. You're going to notice that the instruction and guidance is PDF for both out-of-state and local, and the narrative document is a Word. So this should be fairly easy for you all. Once you click on it, you're going to open it up. Instead of trying to do anything in this document, you need to go ahead and download the file, and then you can open it within your Word. So that should be fairly easy for you all. The next thing I just want to make sure that you're aware is that there are two different timelines, and those are both listed on.
So sorry, you all. This is
In the April approval.
It's just naming that there are timelines on the website for you all.
apologies, you all.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So just making sure when you get this access, there was many questions about, are we going to have the links to this slide deck, and is this recording going to be available? Yes. And then you can go back and look through it if you need to. So let's go ahead and start talking about the parts of the application package. So this application package has 5 components. We're going to talk a little bit about each of the components. The first one is the instructions and guidance document. This is really meant to be a resource for the applicants to provide clear directions on how to complete the application, along with providing all of your key dates. For the HPE application, the high performing entity, due to the nature of the two approval timelines, it's really important that you review the document very carefully before jumping into the application. This resource also provides a detailed explanation of who is eligible to apply for specific applications. Additionally, this document will cover the evaluation criteria that's in your guide to help make sure that you're answering all of the narrative questions fully. We highly recommend that you review the evaluation criteria before submitting your application. The second part of your application package is your narrative document. As I showed you before in the video, this is a Word document where you're going to answer all of your questions inside of this Word document. This document also houses the application checklist. Within that, it has all of the attachments hyperlinked for your convenience. Then the next part of the applicant package is the attachment cover sheets. Those are going to provide all of the directions for you to be able to complete all of the attachments that are required for the application. Again, all of those attachments are hyperlinked in the narrative document on the attachment checklist. The next two that we're going to talk about are two Excel documents that are going to be a part of your application package. The first is your financial plan workbook. This is going to give us a clear idea about your financial plan. And this is similar to what we utilize in our Generation 30 application. The next one that you're going to have is going to be probably the most important attachment for you all as a high-performing entity applicant. And this is the portfolio overview workbook. This is really your chance to highlight all of your schools that you've currently run and all of their performance data, and really give some deep reflections about how your students are performing and what constitutes you as a high-performing entity. So all of these things together create the high-performing entity application package. But let's talk a little bit more about the narrative document. So this slide focuses on the narrative document, and I'll walk you through its format, content, and ensure that you know how to navigate it effectively, as it is one of the most important documents for you all to be able to answer your responses to the narrative question. This document is a fillable Word document. Again, you're going to download it to your computer, and then you're going to be able to type into it directly. The response boxes and tables are going to be expandable. They'll automatically adjust when you're writing in it. The narrative document also houses all of the all of the questions for the application, and also links to the attachments. Like I mentioned before, I highly recommend that you actually review the application in its entirety prior to beginning to fill it out. As a reminder, as a resource for you all, the instruction and guidance document will provide that additional support to help you understand any terms and the evaluation criteria for each portion of the narrative document. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the attachments. Again, it's worth repeating just because sometimes it's hard for people to find the attachments, but all of the attachments are hyperlinked inside of the attachment checklist page in the HPE narrative document. There's going to be different components within the attachments. First, you're going to find the cover sheets. On each of the cover sheet, it's going to provide you with specific information and instructions for completing each attachment. These attachments are PDF, and you will need to make sure that you're submitting the cover sheet along with what you're filling out. There are going to be some attachments that are fillable forms, so you can go ahead and complete and insert your responses directly into these forms. And then finally, there's the worksheets, which are provided as Excel workbooks. You must complete and submit them as an Excel format. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to John, and he can discuss a little bit more about drafting the application.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so just kind of grounding ourselves back in the timeline. Again, you all want to go ahead and decide when you all want to submit your application, and that'll kind of define, obviously, how long you all will have to draft your proposal. For the next couple of minutes, we're just going to touch on some very high-level questions that kind of get repeated across our applications. How many applications are you actually completing? Are you limited by who you can enroll? Do you have to notify anyone? Are you limited by instruction materials that you can select? And then lastly, Sarah will talk about engagement and like how you all will engage with us during that drafting period. All right, so I think a lot of you all, if not some of you all, are probably from out of state. So kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how we in Texas and open enrollment charter schools define school versus campus versus expansion and how all that interplays with our application. Starting with the application phase, as Brittany said, you all will be submitting one application. I know other authorizers, each school or each campus is sort of designated as its own charter. In Texas, you are applying for one LEA, and in that application, you will then designate and propose how many campuses you plan to operate within the first initial 5-year contract regarding the LEA. In terms of the operational phase, again, just as a reminder to you all that the LEA is the governing board, it's a governing body, and so all campuses are governed by that one governing body. There are not multiple governing boards across the campuses, just one at the LEA level. In the application, you will note that campuses are proposed, grade levels are proposed, as well as maximum enrollment. So maximum enrollment, I just want to go ahead and kind of define here, because I know that's a common question that we get. Again, should you all be awarded a charter, you would be awarded an initial 5-year contract. And so within those 5 years, you have to designate how many students at max you will be allowed to enroll. So if you put 300 students as max enrollment, that means you will not be allowed to enroll more than 300 students during that 5-year initial period, barring our conversation in a second about expansion amendments. But as a general rule, what you put in your application, you will be held to, because that will be then part of the charter contract. So what you put in your proposal, you want to be very kind of thoughtful about and considerate about, and just make sure that that is a viable option for you and there's no real legitimate room to grow unless, again, you plan to pursue expansion amendments later. So with that said, moving to expansion amendments. So in Texas, as a new charter operator, again, you are held by what you put in your application. However, there are situations where if you meet certain accountability ratings and financial health ratings, you would then be eligible to request an expansion amendment where you could increase those grade levels, the maximum enrollment, as well as maximum enrollment, grade levels, and campuses, excuse me. However, please note that that would not be effective until the beginning of year 4. So for the first few years, you are again very locked into what you put in the proposal that you either submit in October or December. Okay, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about instructional materials. So we kind of wanted to reiterate for folks that our process allow you all to choose your own instructional materials. You have the ability to design, select, and even implement instructional materials at that local level. However, charter schools here in Texas are still bound and are required to cover 100% of the TEKS, which stands for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and those form the curriculum, the foundational curriculum in Texas. Here at TEA, we have many resources to provide guidance in planning for those TEKS-aligned documents and materials, but the agency has also in recent years created the Open Education Resource, also known as OER, which are free for the public use and have evaluated through a very rigorous vetting process called the Texas Resource Review, which we'll talk about in a second. Did want to touch a little bit on HQIM, also known as high quality instructional materials, again, because you will see that in the application if you haven't already seen it yet. So yeah, again, you'll notice that term being used throughout the application. This is a research-based initiative here in Texas to offer extremely high quality proven materials to really enhance student learning. and remove some burden from teachers to create all of the instructional materials, and again, built from best practice requirements. So here in the center of the slide, you'll notice that we've actually defined HQIM. Again, this is defined, I think, several times, both in the instructions and guidance doc, as well as the narrative doc. But high quality instructional materials has to meet these 4 basic requirements. It needs to be TEKS aligned. It needs to have a comprehensive and cohesive scope and sequence. It needs to include lesson level materials with engaging texts, problems, and assessments. And then lastly, it does need to be externally validated or research-based. So again, you can develop your own materials, your own curriculum, but at the end of the day, we are still looking to see that it meets the definition of high quality. And then last, again, I want to touch real quick on that Texas Resource Review and TEKS alignment. So the purpose of the Texas Resource Review is to just assist districts in selecting those materials. The TRR, Texas Resource Review, is designed to provide comprehensive and user-friendly information about the quality of those materials using evidence captured by teams of Texas educators trained on a very specific Texas quality rubric. At that, I will kick over now to Sarah to talk a little bit about communication and supports.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna pop in here, John.
Go
So
for it.
a little bit about communication and support. We really want to make sure we know this is a rigorous process, but we want to ensure that it's also a super positive experience. And whatever we can do on our end to support that, we want to do. So please know we are happy to support you throughout this process as we are able. We're always here and we welcome you to reach out to the New Schools team for tech support. However, we cannot offer specific or competitive advice about your proposal or what you plan to do in your narrative. So it is very tied to doing technical support at this point. We have created a robust set of seminars for applicants, and they're all posted on our webpage. You can actually take a look at those right now. And those are meant to be of support for our applicants. Our first seminar will be October 9th, and the registration link is already open for you on the applications page. We will hold open office hours starting October 16th via a Zoom link that's a standing link. And so those office hours provide an opportunity to ask technical questions and to also serve as a collaborative space where applicants can work together and offer support. So we really encourage you to find time if you have questions to join those office hours to really create that space for you as well. So for the next few minutes, we're going to cover our submission process. So kind of addressing when it's due, what you'll include, where you will be submitting all of your documents. That's a very big, important step. So let's start a little bit about the most important nugget for you today of when this is all due. So the January approval submission is due by 5 p.m. on October 11th. And for the April approval, submissions are also due by 5 p.m., but on December 2nd. So for the next few minutes, we will cover the submission process, including when it's due, what's included, and where you submit your documents. So the biggest thing for you to know is really where those deadlines fall. So again, going back to those timelines and anchoring in, putting those things on your calendar and your phone, so you have all of your submissions turned in on time. The process now is fully electronic, so there is no paper submissions that will be accepted. And you can submit your proposal early if you choose to do so and it's ready to go. But I do want to flag that once you submit it, it is final. So we just want to make sure once we get it, that is the document in which we are taking, and that will become your final submission. The agency really does not accept multiple submissions, and so that is why we take that first submission in its entirety. And it is very important that you're kind of troubleshooting up until you submit it, making sure that everything works and it's ready to go, because we will disqualify applicants. They'll become ineligible after that 5 p.m. Timeline. John, did you want to add anything about that one? Okay.
Just the importance of getting it on time. Because it's an electronic submission, I just highly recommend folks start at least 2 hours early. So around 3 o'clock at the latest, trying to get those documents uploaded. There's a lot of variables, obviously, in submitting things electronically. We just would hate to get a phone call at 4:58 saying something, is slowed down. Because again, if something is received after 5, we would not be able to accept it. So just giving yourself enough time to submit is, I think, the most important nugget we can give to you all.
Thank you for that. All right, so let's talk about your application submission and its final state and what that looks like. So now that you've kind of gotten through all of the things, it's now time to submit your application. So each applicant will at minimum have 3 files to upload. The first file being the narrative response document that was referenced earlier. As a reminder, that document is where all of the questions are located and where you will input all of your responses. The second document that you're going to upload is your attachments that you have completed and now combined into one large file. So you can do that in 2 different ways, whether that is you printing them out and scanning them in and or using Adobe to combine them. You will upload those into one file, which we call the attachment submission document. And we'll discuss that again in the next few slides. The third document that you will submit is the financial plan workbook. So please note, you will submit this document as an Excel file, the same format that you download and complete it in. So it is turned back into us as an Excel. Please do not save the workbook as a PDF for your submission. We will not accept it in any other format other than Excel. So for both the local and out-of-state HP applications, you will have the narrative document, which you will convert into a PDF before you submit, all of the attachments that you will convert into one large PDF to submit, and then 2 Excel workbooks, the financial plan workbook, as well as the portfolio overview workbook. And before I keep going, were there any questions based on what I just said? That's a pretty hefty piece. Okay, do not see any, so I think we're good to keep moving. All right, so for the next slide, this is about assembling the attachments and the submission documents. So submitting all of your things are going to be super important, making sure you can get it all ready to go before the deadline. So I mentioned this before, but the goal is to combine all of the attachment materials into one PDF for your attachment submission documents. So the tech savvy option is to combine all of your documents electronically in Adobe, and or another option can be printing all of your attachments, the cover sheets and the responses, and then scanning them into one file, which that will be the one that you upload. Regardless of the method that you use, we want to ensure that at the end of the day, we only get that one large PDF for the submission of the attachments. So it is important for you also to note before combing through the documents and doing all of that, we really want you, as you're combining them, that you're adding page numbers to each page in the bottom right corner so we can keep track of what is next. Please ensure your document is also flattened before you submit. If you are unsure on how to do this, we will be able to help you walk through that technical portion during the office hours. So additionally, if you are aiming to submit by the January deadline, you can email us and request a time to walk you through that if you do need help. So how to submit? You're going to use the link in the instructions and guidance document to access a share file. This is a cloud-based storage, very similar to like Dropbox. And this is where you will place all of your documents via the drag and drop option. So just slide it over. So pro tip for you, attending the final touches office hour or support seminar, it's going to be super important for you. This is a place where we'll demonstrate, we'll help you, we'll ask you, you can ask us questions before you kind of proceed into the process of you submitting your application pieces. All right, so let's review what happens after you submit the final steps towards your proposal. So we will then move into the completion check. So what happens after you submit your application, a couple days after you do that, our team will begin combing through each application that's submitted on time for completeness. We will look to see if your entity is eligible to apply. So this will include us checking to see if your data qualifies you for this application. And then we will look at all of your attachments to make sure that they are complete. We will look at all of your special assurances to make sure they have all been initials and signed and everything is uploaded correctly. A part of our completion process, there are instances where certain documents that are missing for your initial submission will be eligible for remedy. In that event, we will extend a 5-day cure period, and this is where you'll be able to provide us with those missing documentations. With that said, there are also some instances where missing documents are not eligible for remedy. Those results or those happen in a lot of different instances. So the result of those missing documents would disqualify you from advancing further in the process. An example is the late submission of the application. We don't receive it by 5 p.m. We will not be able to process your application any further. The other big area that we see applicants removed from our process is failing to complete the application narratives. And if you submit an application that has substantially missing portions in the narrative responses, we will not be able to process your application any further. So what is happening during the data analysis and eligibility phase? So all eligible applications that have successfully passed the completion check will move into this review process. Applicants will be scored on eligibility and requirements of their application, and each application will be reviewed on its own merit and in accordance with the evaluation criteria published by TEA. The portfolio workbook will serve as a critical data source for the analysis phase. It is essential that the data is accurate and complete to prevent any issues moving forward. TEA will use this data to assess whether the charter school meets the standard to be evaluated as a high-performing entity and has performed at a level of performance comparable to A or B rating. In this evaluation phase, we will review current performance ratings and student data on state assessments to determine if the student achievement score corresponds to an A or B on domain 1 of Texas accountability systems. So if the applicant meets all of those requirements, the applicant will then advance to the due diligence period. So let's get into what happens during the due diligence period. So the timeframes are listed for you at the top of the slide so you can see, and just to note, those timeframes are listed based on the SBOE approval window. You've heard us say that a couple of times. So during these timeframes, these items may be reviewed for readiness: your educational plan and curriculum, financial review, governance assessment, as well as legal compliance check. Some additional review activities may be included, but are not limited to the following: school site visits, meetings that can happen in person or virtually, and having some interviews and conversations with your current authorizer if you are an out-of-state entity. So the commissioner reviews all relevant application information and proposes award. In order to be proposed for award, an applicant must meet all of the requirements of the application and demonstrate sufficient capabilities during the due diligence phase. So based on the SBOE approval timeframe, so sorry, my voice is leaving me. Based on the SBOE approval timeframe, the proposal period will either be in November or in February. So again, that nice clean timeline side by side, so you're able to see where is most appropriate for you to apply. All right, so we're just going to pop our information up one more time. I told you you're going to see this a couple times throughout the day. That way we can make sure you have it, and if you have questions, it can get to us. And let's see what is in the chat, if there is anything. So what's going to happen with accountability with CMOs, we look at the whole system. We do not look at just a few. So just to note for everybody, especially as an out-of-state or in-state, we are going to look at the whole system in its entirety. All right, team, I don't think we have any other questions for right now. John, did you have anything else to add? Or Christy, I can also ping you in here if you have anything else to add. If not, you'll just give me a thumbs up and we can keep going. Awesome. All right, so since we do not have any questions, we are going to take a little break. We will come back at 10. And at that time, we'll have our presentations from John, Peja, as well as Dina on our financial plan workbook. So we will see you soon. We're just going to pause the recording here. You guys can stay logged in, and then we will be back at 10 a.m. Thank you, guys.
The cover sheet is going to be where you will actually see the per student funding amount, whether it's grades K through 12, or if you're going to do pre-K as well. You will use these figures to determine and draft your financial plan. We also have a general instructions tab. So if you have just general questions about the mechanics of the workbook, how to fill it out, what some of the tabs are designed to do, where you're supposed to input information, things like that, you'll find on the general instructions tab. From here on out, you will notice two colors. You'll notice green tabs and you will notice blue tabs. The green tabs will indicate to you that you have something to fill out. We would ask that you please do several QCs, quality controls, before you submit this, because all green tabs should have information in every cell that's applicable to you. We'll get to error codes in a minute, but please be sure that you fill out everything on the green tabs. Blue tabs indicate that it is auto-populating from one of the green tabs. So you do not have to do anything for the blue tabs other than, again, review it for accuracy before you submit it. So on the school info tab, you'll include all of your information here, as well as your startup year and your fiscal year end dates. The information that you put here will actually auto feed all of the other tabs to denote what your startup year will be, what your year one will be, so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the enrollment tab. Dina's going to talk way more about it than I will, but here you will input all of your enrollment projections, as well as programs that you plan to offer and enroll students in. You will have a personnel tab. The personnel tab, as you will see here, our workbook spans from the startup year all the way to year 5. Going back to an earlier conversation we had, we offer an initial 5-year contract. So your financial plan should account for all 5 years, including that startup year. With that said, you're going to account for all personnel that you plan to hire through the duration of the contract term. So that's going to be all 5 years. You'll input your position description here. And then you will then categorize that position according to the various options that we give you here in the drop-down menu. You'll include the salary, as well as you'll account for any raises that are going to be offered, as well as a number of FTEs here. I did want to highlight really quick, I'll zoom in on the notes section. So Peja will talk about it a little bit, but notes are very important. to fill out, because notes help us kind of decipher what your intentions are for allocating certain funding, where, or assuming certain expenses. This will also really come into play as you are budgeting for your CSP, your Charter School Startup Grant funds. We ask that any funds, any CSP funds that you plan to, if you plan to allocate towards a specific salary or event, that you notate that here in this notes column. You'll also find a very robust startup year one and assumptions tab. Again, you are going to fill this out with all revenue and expense projections. And as you scroll down, you will notice that it all is totaled down here at the bottom. Again, you want to just ensure that all of your numbers are accurate and everything's adding up correctly before you submit this. One thing that Dina and Peja will note, but I'll just quickly note it here, is that there are several kind of help boxes along the way. So if you see the little red triangle in a cell, it should help you kind of decipher what we're meaning. All right, and then going into the blue tabs, again, these are tabs that you cannot adjust. They're auto-populated and auto-calculated from the green tabs. There's a budget tab, again, just providing a high-level overview of your assumptions. There's a summary of finance tab that Dina will talk about. There's a payment formula example. And then last but not least, we have a workbook summary. And this really is just serves as a one-page, again, giving it to maybe a stakeholder or someone else just to look at so they can see a bird's eye view of your financial plan across all 5 years. So again, this is a very robust workbook. I mentioned error codes, and before I hand it off to Dina, I just wanted to say this. We don't expect to see any error codes in your submission. So if you start to see them, please reach out to us. It is something that we can help you with. As Brittany said, there are a lot of things that we cannot help you with due to the nature of our process, but troubleshooting the workbook is something under our purview to help you with. So feel free, if something's not making sense or you're getting an error code somewhere, please email us. The more specific you can be, the quicker we can help you. So a lot of times that includes just telling us what tab you're having a problem with, and then just referencing what exact cell you're having a problem with. Again, that will help us go back and look at the workbook and see maybe what other cells are feeding into that might be giving you that error code. So feel free to reach out with any questions about this. We'd be happy to walk you through. Again, we can't tell you what numbers to put in the cells, but we can surely tell you why maybe something's happening that's affecting your ability to craft the budget that you need. That's all I have. I will certainly answer questions at the end of the presentation, but I'll go ahead and let Dina do her part, and then Peja, and we'll do Q&A at the end.
Okay, John, if you can go and click on the enrollment tab for me. Hi, I'm Dina Black. I'm with the Charter School Finance and State Funding. So as John mentions, this is the worksheet in which the charter school applicants will enter enrollment information for 5 years. One thing to note, as John mentioned, is that throughout the workbook, there are going to be these red triangle cells. I would look at each of those before you enter any information. It gives you additional guidance. So like, for example, he did hover over there the line item for average daily attendance, which currently is pre-populated at 85%. That's a conservative estimate. You could obviously change that if that warrants it. But you'll first probably want to start from top to bottom and start entering enrollment figures. In the top section, you're going to give enrollment based upon grade levels. And then those amounts will sum there in the blue section where it says total number of students enrolled. So, and then one of the features within this enrollments tab workbook is that if you're go down further and you're entering other enrollment figures for other instructional arrangements, it's like for, let's say for special education data, and you report a number like 1,000, let's say enrollment for one of the figures, it will give you a data validation issue error, especially because if that value is greater than the total enrollment listed above. So all you do is retry or cancel or whatnot. So you'll see those kind of validation messages appear to kind of guide you to make sure that that things make sense. So in the enrollments tab, but further down, there's the special population data for special education, current technology. Everything is enrollment based. If you have questions about some of these instructional arrangements, you can refer to the Student Attendance Accounting Handbook. There's information there. You could also look at the information from the Texas Education Code that is listed as well. Please note, one of the questions we received in other sessions is that this is not a campus-based worksheet. You're entering your enrollment for the entire district-wide operation for the charter school. So everything, again, is enrollment-based. The one area in which the charter school would be providing an allotment figure is calculated based on transportation. So there is an allotment within the Summary of Finance and Foundation that permits, that grants money based upon whether or not the charter school is offering transportation. So there's a little bit of guidance there where you can do a calculation if that is going to be part of your program to provide transportation. And then if you have any questions on this, to John's point and the team's point, you could always send questions, while you're doing the application process. Could you clear those out really quickly, I think, for me, John? Yeah. What I wanted to show you or want John to demonstrate is just enter one student, right? So that's one student in year one. What I want you to know is that year one is going to be the data, the basis of what you'll see on the Summary of Finances. So can you go to the Summary of Finances tab? So that one student there for the entire school year, they're attending 85%. If you go to the bottom, it generates for the charter school 7,000, whatever, 243. So that's where these estimates on the cover sheet come from. If you had just one student, they're not in any other instructional arrangement. That value changes depending if that student is in other instructional settings, but it's just to kind of show the relationship between one student being there all school year at 85% attendance rate. That's the amount for the year that the charter school would earn. If you go to the top, John, so this actual Summary of Finance is a model of what a Summary of Finances that are published on our state aid reports. And so it begins with refined average daily attendance, and then it breaks down all of the various average daily attendance calculations, full-time equivalent calculations for all the various categories. So if you scroll down a little bit, I know we didn't put a lot of other information, so it doesn't have the calculations in there, but there's an area of preset. It's a state average funding component. So these are the funding rates that are used to determine the allotments and the calculations. So the main one that you'll see that's part of the General Appropriations Act that's kind of set is that district basic allotment at $6,160. So that times your various ADAs, and if there's a funding weight, that's the calculation for the various allotments. So like the regular program allotment there on line, let's see, A63 that shows 5,236, that represents the ADA of 0.85 times the district basic allotment of 6,160. And then other allotments, again, it uses that district basic allotment times the weight, which are, I think it's represented, are the weights shown here, John, on the top? Go up to the top. Yeah, so you see those funding weights, those represent the funding weights, that's in column C. And as you scroll down, I don't believe, yeah, so there's area for each of the areas of detail, the calculations, there's the area for transportation, and then the overall cost, the combined cost for your foundation amount that would be the tier 1 allotments above, and then the tier 2. Tier 2, the charter school receives, even though they don't have property taxes, they get statewide average property tax rates based on what the school districts receive, and that allows them to get some money under that tier calculation. So again, this Summary of Finance only represents once you've entered data in year 1 of the enrollment tab. And then also this worksheet, there's no data entry. All right, is there anything else?
Not yet, Dina.
Okay.
You can go ahead and transition to Peja. Peja,
Okay.
let me get your piece up and then I'll hand it over to you.
Are you gonna do the PowerPoint, John? Yes, there you go. Hi, my name is Pija and I work in the Financial Compliance Division. And I'm gonna just talk to you a little bit about the financial workbook. So like John mentioned, the workbook has different tabs. And one of the first tabs is the estimates tab, which Dina and John both talked about. What I want to mention about the estimate tab is we really advise that you use realistic enrollment numbers when you're completing this tab, and you have a conservative approach, because this affects the expected revenues. And so if you overestimate your enrollment numbers, then it could cause you financial trouble going forward. And enter the average attendance, average daily attendance, the ADA, because in this tab, because this calculates the state funding that your charter will get, and it reflects on the startup year 1 tab in this workbook. And the other thing, like I just said, this workbook has different tabs. And the data that you enter in a tab carries over or feeds into the other tabs. So it'd be really good for you to get familiar with the different tabs and navigate through this worksheet and get comfortable, and then finalize your final worksheet and submit it to us. And provide a detailed narrative startup plan and outline the costs that goes with the startup activities. So when I do my review, I go through each line item of the financial workbook, and then I read the budget narrative and the attachments that you submit. And then I go back to make sure that the budgeted items in the budgeted amounts in the workbook align with what has been stated in the budget narrative and the attachments. So keep that in mind and make sure that all the amounts are aligned and match up. And John briefly mentioned this, but in the notes section of the startup and the year 1 tab, please give a detailed description of your assumptions, because this really helps us and it saves a lot of time when we do our review. And also, if you're going to be using CSP funds, please do mention that in the notes area. And then budgeting for reserves. This is really helpful, because if you have an unexpected expense or the estimated revenues fall short, it's always good. It's a good practice to have a fallback and a reserve and a contingency plan. And it's, you all know that having support from the community, from charitable institutions is really, really good. And charters with community support are very likely to be very successful. And that includes financial support. So any letters of commitments from donors and charitable institution grants, please make sure you have all that documentation submitted to us, because we really look at that to make sure that the revenue tabs in the workbook are correct and showing that amount. And if you have any questions, please email me or call me, or call the charter folks, and they'll forward the questions to us. And back to you, John.
Thanks, Pija. Thanks, Dina. At the moment, we don't have any finance related questions. So I guess that's it. And just to reiterate what we've been saying, if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A portion of our webinar today. If we can't get to it today, or the complexity of the question probably would be benefited by a little bit more research, we will include that in our FAQ document for you all to review at that time. I know someone had a question about dropout recovery and whether or not that would be an eligible entity. Again, that might be something that we need to do a bit more research on and provide some more feedback to you at that time.
There's another question about facilities. And so it really just depends. It's really hard to get a building here nowadays. So it would behoove you if you can have somewhere kind of set up or know where you're going to go, but it is not officially required for you to have it at the time of submission. Just give another minute or two to see if anything pops up. But our finance team, Pija and Dina, thank you for being here. Feel free to hop off, and if anything else comes our way, we can forward it your way.
Thank you.
And I don't see anything else in the chat team. Our next presentation won't be until 10:30. So I would like to allow people to have a little bit of a break while we get Nate situated and ready to go for his presentation at 10:30. To go. Floor is yours, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Brittany, John, and Sarah for inviting me into this space today to talk a little bit about the CSP Startup Grant. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be discussing as much as we can about it, though I could talk about it for hours probably. There's a lot of information that goes into it. I just wanted to flag that your CSP grant, your application for a CSP grant is considered optional. However, awards are up to $900,000, which can be a big boost when it comes to the planning and implementation of your academic program. So we do hope that you would apply. My name is Nate, and I am the current charter school program grant specialist and the interim project director for the CSP grant. I've included my email on this slide, as I will be your point of contact for anything CSP grant related. Any and all questions you have, feel free to shoot them my way. Charlotte Werman and Carmen Patrick are also listed on this slide as they help me facilitate this grant and will be in communication with you at different stages of the process should you choose to pursue this opportunity. So here's an overview of our agenda today. We'll start with our purpose, talk about who the eligible applicants are. We'll go into some grant processes and timelines, talk about the budget and the use of CSP funds, and finally, the questions you'll be seeing in the application. And after we cover all these items, we will have a 10-minute Q&A session. You're welcome to drop in any questions in the chat or the Q&A section of Zoom throughout the presentation, and I will do my best to get them all answered in that 10-minute period. So we'll start with the purpose of the Charter Schools Program Grant. Just an overview, this was a $100 million grant awarded to the Texas Education Agency back in the fall of 2020 by the U.S. Department of Education. The grant period runs from October 1st of 2020 through September 30th of 2025. TEA awards funds to you, the LEAs, as subgrantees to, in your case, open and prepare new charter schools. And we also have a stream of grantees who are replicating and expanding high-quality charter schools. The overall purpose of the grant is to grow the number of high-quality charter schools in Texas, especially those focused on improving academic outcomes for educationally disadvantaged students. So who are the eligible applicants for this non-competitive grant opportunity? First, you must be recommended by the commissioner and not vetoed by the State Board of Education. 2, eligible applicants must meet the federal definition of a charter school as defined in ESSA. There are 13 aspects to that definition, all of which must be met for you to be eligible to receive the award. And should you receive an award, you must continue to meet every aspect of that federal definition throughout the entirety of the grant to remain eligible to get funding. And finally, you must never have received any CSP funds under ESSA. So if you are affiliated with or are proposing to contract with a CMO, you must ensure that if the CMO received the CSP CMO grant from USDE, that your campus for which you're applying for this grant has not received any of those CSP CMO funds. If they have received any dollars from that CSP CMO grant from USDE, that campus is not eligible for a Texas CSP grant. So some grant processes. You, the grantees, will complete the CSP grant application as part of the Generation 30 HPE application. This application will be externally reviewed, and there may be contingencies related to the grant application. If the charter is awarded, you, the applicant, will submit 2 supplemental documents. 1, the grant application, and 2, a corresponding budget worksheet to our grants administration division. These documents will then be reviewed and negotiations will start to take place. And once these negotiations are complete, you, the grantee, will receive your notice of grant award. And at that point, you'll be able to submit requests for reimbursement through the CSP grant. One thing to note about these negotiations is that the more prompt your responses to our negotiation notes are, the faster you'll receive that NOGA and the faster you can request reimbursement for any allowable expenses incurred. So if you receive your negotiation notes and it takes you 3 weeks to respond to Carmen, our grant negotiator, your NOGA will be delayed by about 3 weeks. So please be prompt in responding to those negotiation notes. We want you to be able to request reimbursement as fast as possible. So as mentioned, the CSP grant is a reimbursement grant. The award, which is up to $900,000, is not front loaded to you in any way, shape, or form. You will incur expenses as outlined in your approved grant application, and then you will submit requests for reimbursement through TEA's expenditure reporting system. So some grant timeline information. The grant start date is the date at which you, the LEA, can start incurring costs related to the grant. And then the NOGA date is the date that the NOGA is approved and you can start entering expenditures for reimbursement in that expenditure reporting system. So let's say Campus A spends 2 months in negotiation and get their NOGA 2 months after the grant start date. The applicant is able, or the subgrantee is able to request reimbursement for any expenses incurred from that grant start date to the NOGA date. Across that 2-month period. However, any expenses that are unallowable for reimbursement through the CSP grant will not be eligible for reimbursement. And these expenses that you're requesting reimbursement for must also be aligned to what was proposed in your grant application. So if you receive a CSP grant, please make sure that any cost you're planning to request reimbursement for adhere to the proposed budget in your application that was approved and are considered allowable under the CSP grant. Just so you know, we will go over allowable and unallowable costs later on in this presentation. And finally, there's the grant end date, which is the date by which you must expend all funds and utilize the items and services you purchased with grant funds. So, big overview. The grant start date is the date in which you can start spending funds and have those reimbursed, and the grant end date is the final date on which you can spend funds and request reimbursement. Any funding left over once the grant end date passes will be deobligated back to Texas Education Agency. So the CSP grant is broken into 2 phases, planning and implementation. So for our planning activities, those are related to the planning and program design of the charter's educational program. And these activities take place from the grant start date to the first day the campus starts serving students. Please note that the planning activities cannot occur for more than 18 months. After the planning phase is complete, you will move on into the implementation phase, where implementation activities, which are related to the implementation of your charter's educational program, can occur. And that will happen from the first day your campus begins serving students to the grant end date. So if you look down here, you'll see grant start date is here. The planning phase goes until the first day of school. Implementation phase starts and ends on the grant end date. So some more on planning versus implementation. Budget expenditures are tied to the type of activity, not necessarily when the expenditure occurs. So there are planning activities and implementation activities, and all of your proposed purchases will be budgeted as such. Some purchases that are allowable during the implementation phase may be purchased before the first day of school. They will still be budgeted as part of implementation, even though it's occurring in the planning phase. So the phase in which a purchase is allowable is determined by the type of activity and not necessarily the specific time in which that purchase was made. So an example of this is if you were to purchase classroom furniture such as desks for students or smart boards for the classrooms, these purchases are considered implementation activities. However, you need to have those in your school prior to the first day of serving students. So you are able to purchase it during the planning phase, even though it's an expense tied to implementation. So some activities are only allowable as planning activities, some are only allowable as implementation activities, and then there are a few that can be are considered both planning and implementation activities. So you see some examples over here. Salaries, contracted personnel, and rent are considered planning activities and can only be reimbursed during the planning phase. Non-consumable materials and supplies such as textbooks, technology and equipment, and classroom furniture is considered implementation activities and must be bought during that phase, or must be tied to implementation activities. And then you have professional development and recruitment materials that are considered both planning and implementation activities. So again, planning activities are tied to the planning and design of the educational program, which may include refinement of the desired educational results and of methods for measuring progress towards achieving those results, or professional development of teachers and other staff who will work in the charter school. My apologies, I said, or it's not, you pick one of these or the other. But historically, we have seen most of our current and past sub-grantees budgeting for planning activities tied to professional development. Implementation activities are tied to the implementation of the charter school and its educational program, which may include informing the community about the school, acquiring the necessary equipment and educational materials and supplies, acquiring or developing curriculum materials, and any other initial operational costs that cannot be met from state or local sources. So onto our budget and use of funds. Just wanted to start with some brief grant management basics. The grant start date will depend on when that funding memo is released to the public. You will be informed after this funding memo is released, and that grant start date will indicate that you are able to start incurring costs for reimbursement. All expenditures and services must take place within the grant period. Again, that's that grant start date to the grant end date. You, the sub-grantees, will have access to your NOGA and will be able to submit requests for reimbursements only after negotiations are complete. So please take care of those negotiations in a timely fashion. Requests for reimbursement are entered through TEA's expenditure reporting system and require proper source documentation for approval. So you will not just be saying, we spent $100,000 on this. We would like some reimbursement, please. We need you to provide us and specifically me with some source documentation to review. So if you submit $100,000 to be reimbursed, we will need very detailed documentation showing exactly what was purchased or whose salary was reimbursed, the time period, time and effort sheets. We need to see all of that before we will manually approve that request for reimbursement. And finally, what you submit in your original charter application is not what you're stuck with. So if you need to submit an amendment to your budget because you want to move some funds and to other categories, that is allowable. However, that amendment request needs to be submitted to us before you start purchasing anything of the new proposed activities or the along the lines of the new budget you want to move towards. If you have any questions about if an amendment needs to be requested, if you're not sure if I'm moving 200 from here to here, do I need to submit an amendment? Please reach out to me and I will get you moving in the right direction. So moving on to our allowable uses of funds, I want to flag that this will not be a full list of the allowable and non-allowable activities. You will find that in the program guidelines, which will be posted along with the grant opportunity on the TEA grant opportunities page. We ask that you please read these program guidelines in their entirety before crafting your application and budget. It will contain all of the allowable and non-allowable activities. This would be a very long presentation if I went over every single thing that was allowable or unallowable. So there's a minimum threshold that all of your costs must meet regarding the CSP grant. First, are these costs necessary? So is this item needed for the startup of a charter school? When you're filling out that application, please ask yourself, is what you're proposing to purchase necessary to accomplish the goals you've established in that application? Second, is it reasonable? Would a reasonable person spend that amount on an item and would it withstand public scrutiny? So if you are proposing to serve 10 students in your first year of operation, but you're requesting $900,000 in administrative costs for those 10 students, that would not necessarily be a reasonable request. So please make sure the outcomes in the application are justified by the amount you are requesting. Third is the cost allocable, and that is it being incurred specifically for startup, and is the cost proportional to the benefit provided. And finally, which we're about to discuss, is the item allowed under this CSP grant program. So some allowable costs for planning activities. You can request reimbursement for the planning and design of the charter school's educational program. You can request reimbursement for professional development, training for teachers and staff, as well as any special education support you're putting into place. You are allowed to request reimbursement for salary costs for the following positions only: teachers, school leaders, and specialized instructional support personnel. What constitutes those specialized instructional support personnel will be clarified in those program guidelines I talked about 2 slides ago, which will be posted on the TA Grants Opportunities page in the near future. Please note certain conditions do apply when it comes to payroll reimbursement. First, salaries cannot be paid for activities related to ongoing operations. Payroll expenditures will only be paid out with CSP funds and are only allowable for activities that support the planning or program design of the charter campus. And no payroll expenditures are allowed beyond the 30th calendar day after the campus begins serving students. So if your personnel split their time between ongoing operational activities and planning activities, only the portion of time associated with conducting the planning activities is allowable as an initial operational cost. The charter school must maintain accurate time and effort records to document the amount of time each employee works on tasks related to planning activities associated with that campus. So contracted personnel may be paid from the grant start date up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. And rental or occupancy costs for the school facility may also be paid out from the grant up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. So for payroll, contract personnel, and rental or occupancy costs, I know there's that mark of up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. I want to provide a visual for that. So again, we have our grant start date and grant end date, our planning phase and our implementation phase. So remember, planning goes up to the first day of school. And so these planning activities, salary reimbursement, contracted personnel, and rent are only eligible to be reimbursed up to 30 days after the campus begins serving students. Once you hit that day, afterwards, you will no longer be able to request reimbursement for salaries, contracted personnel, or rental or occupancy costs. So moving on to implementation activities, some allowable costs are one-time startup equipment purchases necessary to implement a charter school, which may include desks, chairs, computers, tablets, furniture, equipment related to technology like smart boards, physical education and art, and playground equipment. You can also purchase non-consumable supplies and materials for startup activities. So non-consumable supplies and materials are those that can be reused. These are all eligible for reimbursement: textbooks, library books, reading materials, and teaching materials. Consumable items are not eligible for reimbursement by the CSP grant, and consumable items are defined as those that cannot be reused, such as one-time student use workbooks, pens, pencils, paper. Only expenses for non-consumable supplies and materials are eligible for reimbursement. You will also be able to pay for installation costs associated with computers, data systems, networks, and telephones. You can pay for the installation of the smart boards in your classroom. You can also fund one-time startup costs associated with providing transportation to students. So if you want to use your $900,000 award to purchase a bus to transport your students, that is allowable. You can also pay for costs associated with carrying out minor facilities repairs and any necessary renovations. Minor repairs neither add permanent value to the property nor appreciably prolong its intended life. This is some guidance we've received from USDE. Please note these type of budgeted expenditures may require approval from the U.S. Department of Education. Examples of these minor repairs can include repairing a leak on a roof, replacing a broken window, or repairing a furnace or air conditioning unit in the school. In summation, these minor facility repairs neither prolong the life of the building appreciated in value, but rather keep it in efficient operating condition. You can also purchase financial management software and training, property insurance to cover equipment purchased with grant funds. Please note that this you can only purchase insurance for items purchased with the CSP grant. So if you were to purchase playground equipment using another funding source, you're not able to use CSP funds to purchase property insurance on said equipment. And finally, other appropriate non-sustained costs that cannot be supported from other sources are also considered an allowable cost for implementation activity. So when you're creating your budget, it'll be divided into planning and implementation costs. So please keep in mind the phase in which the expenditure activity is allowed when you're creating it. We have a great new resource this year, the planning and implementation guidance. This will be posted along with those program guidelines. It is an incredibly detailed document that will help you determine if an allowable expense is considered a planning activity, an implementation activity, or both. So please use this resource when developing your budget. To big highlight, the CSP grants support the planning, program design, and initial implementation of public charter schools, and it must be one-time costs, not recurring expenses. So for example, if you were to purchase accounting software, a one-time cost would be a $1,000 license. Once you pay that money, the license is yours in perpetuity. If it were to be a $200 a year subscription, that's considered a reoccurring cost and is not allowable for reimbursement. We only reimburse one-time costs. So for the sake of time, I'm going to speed through some unallowable uses of funds so that we can leave some time for y'all's questions. But you are not able to fund field trips. You're not able to request reimbursement for hosting or sponsoring conferences or advisory councils. No cost of membership in any civic or community organization. As discussed, you can only fund salaries and contracted personnel beyond before the first 30 days of initial implementation, not after. You cannot do any sort of debt service or lease purchase. Rental or occupancy costs for the school facility beyond the first 30 days of serving students is not allowable. You cannot purchase or lease land or real estate. You are not allowed to do any sort of construction whatsoever or cosmetic renovations. Only minor repairs are allowable. You cannot not purchase any consumable, instructional, or other supplies and materials. Only non-consumable materials are allowed. You cannot purchase any sort of accounting or bookkeeping services except for the purchase of an accounting software to comply with FAR. No apparel or promotional materials. No annual audit services. No ongoing food service, whether this be for students or for parents at a community engagement event. No food is allowed to be purchased with the CSP grant. No property or liability insurance. No paying of interest on loans. You cannot use it for deposits of any kind. You cannot use it to purchase any sort of religious instruction, materials, or insignia, and you're not allowed to use it for any sort of extracurricular activities such as UIL, competitions, athletic programs that are not part of the state required physical education program. And seeing as we have 8 minutes left, I'm going to skip over the questions that you will see in your application. I believe the New Schools team will be sending out this presentation to you. So if you're interested in what narratives you need to provide, you will find all of those questions on these 3 slides. So thank you for allowing me to just throw information at y'all for the past 22 minutes. And I'm happy to take any questions y'all might have at this time.
At the moment, Nate, there is nothing in our question and answer. So that means you hit all the marks and everybody feels confident.
Well, I like the sound of that, but I'm not seeing an option to send a chat to everybody, but my email is in that slideshow. At least for me, I need to sit and process something, and then the questions come to me about 30 minutes later. So if you want to shoot me a question via email, I'm totally fine with that. Always happy to speak with each and every one of you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if we do get any questions, we'll send those your way.
All righty. Sounds great. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a good weekend.
Bye, Nate. Thank you. All right, so as we continue moving towards our goal of getting out here on time, we want to just leave some space in case there is some last minute questions. Team, feel free to come off of mute if you have anything else that you need to add before we close out. Right now, not seeing very many questions, so that's a good thing.
Brittany, I have nothing to add at the moment.
Thanks, John. Sarah, I saw your thumbs up, which is wonderful. Thank you. You too, Christy. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we really appreciate you joining in. Just one caveat from Nate's presentation. I think I said it before, but just in case, that CSP grant application is not embedded into the application, which means like the questions are not written out there. It is a separate attachment. It is very different compared to our Gen 30, which where it is embedded into the application portion in which you fill in. So if that is something that you are looking to apply for, it will be an optional available attachment for you. All right, guys. Well, we are available by email, and hopefully we can help you support you in those technical